Hello and welcome back to another episode of Fully Booked, the Hidden Gems author podcast in which Craig Touch and myself, Roland Hume, chat some of the interesting figures and leading lights of this crazy industry we're in of writing and self-publishing. And today we are delighted to have a very special guest, Patrick Greenwood, a fiction writer and a cybersecurity blogger. Welcome to Fully Booked. Thank you so much for joining us, Patrick. How are you doing today?
Oh, fantastic, Roland. Thank you very much for having me.
Well, we are delighted to have you. And of course, we wouldn't be here without the man himself, Craig Touch, the owner and founder of Hidden Gems and an author himself. How are you doing today, Craig?
Doing great. I'm excited about this conversation because I think as people know, if they've been listening and reading the blogs and stuff, that I'm a big fan of, well, I don't know, is fan the right word? I'm really interested in AI. I follow it pretty heavily. I do think that there's a lot of sort of things to worry about in terms of AI. But, you know, and we can talk a bit about that, but I do want to keep this sort of, the focus of today is really to talk about AI and you know, where it's taking the writing industry and how it's going to affect us as writers. But, you know, I'm sure that's going to branch off into some overall conversations about AI in general, and that's fine. I mean, I think that it's such an overwhelming force in just the year or so that it's been around. Nothing in my memory that I can remember has taken over so quickly. Well, maybe COVID, but nothing has taken over so quickly and become ingrained in sort of like almost every part of our lives as AI has. And, you know, not that it's a new thing, like AI has been around for, I mean, I remember when I was a kid, right? We were always talking about AI. I never thought I was going to see it at this level. Certainly not in my lifetime, or at least not like within the next 10, 20 years. But it seems like we woke up one day and it was here. So let's talk a bit about how we got here. And I mean, you're a cybersecurity expert. You write about this sort of stuff all the time. So you're a great person to sort of talk us through where, you know, where this all just sprung from and you know, how we got here and sort of where we're going. And we'll go from there.
Absolutely. So thank you again, guys, very much for having me on this morning as well on this beautiful podcast. So artificial intelligence has been around, to your point, it's been around for many years, probably going back 15, 16 years. You know, Google has used it for years. Data mining is not anything new. Data analytics is not new. It's been around forever. It's been around since even the late 80s, where people got into data sciences for retail, where they process data to try to make things more predictable. But like, who is going to buy what clothes? What day of the week are they buying? You know, things like that as well. So this kind of idea is not new. What's changed, though, is that now AI is becoming ability to process more data and trying to make more data usable. Now, why this is very, very important is a lot of CIOs and CISOs and CEOs are dealing with the problem of we have too much data. And we're storing data, and it's costing us millions of dollars to store data in the cloud, in data centers, in tape backups. So they were on the verge of sort of purging their data for legal reasons. You know, the more data you kept, the more potential legal liability there was. And then suddenly AI came along and said, wait a minute, hold on. We need all that data. We need to process. We need all that. You got to feed the beast, baby. So suddenly we're now back in the reverse of more data is better. So AI really first started off with the ability to process as much data, make some sense of it, put it into some modeling, and say, we think, we know this is where this product's going to go. This is where people are going to buy, where people are going to live, you know, what jobs of the future. And that's fascinating from the standpoint of making it more predictable. You know, CEOs, CIOs, executives, investors, to be kind with you, have all become very lazy. And they think that AI is the answer to their question, are we going to make money? What's the price of silver, right? Do I have cancer? Do I not have cancer? So people look at AI as being an answer, which is really the first big mistake. On the writing side, it's interesting how a lot of writers, and especially screenwriters out here in Los Angeles, you know, had a really big issue with AI, thinking, okay, I'm not going to be needed anymore. And that's not true at all. You know, AI is really great for, especially for writers like ourselves, to process information. There's petabytes of data out there. We cannot manually sift through resources and reference materials, you know, in order to write. We need AI to help sort some of that information for us. So I'm a huge fan of AI from the standpoint of processing data, helping me determine headers, gives me ideas of, okay, how am I going to score from a search engine perspective? But I don't see AI replacing a writer, because ultimately it's our words, it's our voice that people want to read.
I find it so interesting that Sports Illustrated just laid off all of their staff, and artificial intelligence was cited as one of the major reasons for that.
Yes. Yeah, and they're not the only ones doing that. The LA Times is doing it out here as well. I mean, there's a lot of people that, again, this is a knee-jerk reaction. I write blogs for technology companies under my other name of John Gormley, and I've lost work last year as a result of AI. People said, we're going to do ChatGPT, we don't need you, whatever. And that lasted, to be honest with you, about 3 months. And then 3 months later, they came back and said, we don't see the voice. We're missing the identity of the content. We're getting a rudimentary 1-page, 800-word blog, and no one's reading it.
Right.
Because it's written by a robot. Now, the other thing to remember, and I think Greg, you touched on how long AI's been around. One of the things people are discovering is that unless you're pumping AI with a ton of data and you're processing it at high rates of speed, it gets stale very quickly. The answers get stale. The content gets stale. So as I mentioned earlier about people getting lazy, I think what Sports Illustrated is doing and the LA Times are doing is basically getting lazy. They think, oh, we can just pump it out and throw our name on it, and and there it is. But the quality is absolutely definitely going to be hurt, very much so.
And I've noticed that. Oh, I was just going to say, I've noticed there are some things that AI produces that are factually wrong. I did an experiment of putting through to see if AI could write an article about the writing of an author called Frida McFadden, who's quite a recent but prodigiously successful author. And it made up all her books because it didn't have any information. So it made up and wrote this very convincing article about all of these books that she'd never written. And of course, if you aren't familiar with her work, you might have looked at that and approved it for publication, even though it was 100% fictional.
Yes. And remember that AI, the other problem with AI right now is people are discovering is that AI is really the centerpiece of deep fake. And here in the United States, we're facing this now going to election where we don't know who's on the other end of the phone anymore. We don't know if that's Donald Trump's voice. We don't know if that's President Biden's voice. We don't know if Donald Trump really was on a plane flying to New Hampshire because of deep fake. So AI has both the positive people that are trying to discover the positive side, but from a cybersecurity side, it's already been a nightmare. I mean, the email phishing has become near perfect. You read an email, you really think it is from your Aunt Sally telling you just inherited $1 million, click here, right? And it looks perfect. It looks like an email that Aunt Sally wrote 2 years ago. So AI has already proven to be a problem for cyber, and also more importantly from intellectual property. People are slapping on AI, they throw their name on it, and they expect protection. It's like, dude, you didn't write it. You have no protection. So there's so many things that have happened around AI, but I think that part of the problem, though, is that it's only just the beginning. I mean, this is really going to be a very slippery slope for a couple of years.
Absolutely. I mean, that's always been my biggest fear is, the bad actors are going to have a field day with this, being able to create all sorts of stuff. We won't be able to trust anything we see or hear anymore. And that part of it is super scary to me. And I think that that problem is only going to get worse as time goes on. I think that one of the biggest issues is the good guys, let's say, are sort of constrained by rules and all these things that people want to put in place. AI should do this and shouldn't do this and shouldn't be allowed to do this. Well, the bad guys aren't going to be playing by those rules, right? So they're going to have a huge advantage, and by the time they start pumping that stuff out, everyone's going to be playing catch up to try to block it, right? And it's not just some guy sitting in his basement. It's going to be state-sponsored issues. But anyway, that's outside of this discussion, because I could go on and on for that. One of the things you said that I think was really interesting that I've never really thought about before is the idea that the AI does get stale, right? And it has to be fed by that information. And all of these people that started to lay off writers and have their content written, and I've seen it, and I can see, like, if you're writing a blog, I mean, I get the emails all the time from companies saying, hey, we can provide AI written content and whatever. the content is flat, and it doesn't have a lot of feeling to it. It's a very, very, factual, if they're even real facts, writing. It's not something I would ever put on my site. But the point that you made is, the idea that it would get stale if it's not constantly fed.
Right.
If everybody's producing content written by AI, that isn't really new content. It's just regurgitating that old content, which means it'll just get stale even faster because there's not going to be anything new for it to pull from.
Yes. Well, remember that the other thing was about content and AI, and this is really something I wrote about 3 months ago, was the federal government here in the United States has already started buying content. They're starting to acquire more content because they realize that their LLM models, so the large language models that they use for AI, they need data. So even some of the biggest companies like Facebook and others are going out and acquiring content from content sources. Now, what makes OpenAI last year very interesting was that when Sam Altman came out and said, oh, all the data sitting in OpenAI was from open source. Well, now you have lawsuits of writers going against Facebook saying, wait a minute, or even the New York Times has said, wait a minute, did you use our work in your model? Did you use our content inside your model? And is there somewhere buried within that LLM somewhere that you have a New York Times article that you have not paid us for? So I think that's really an interesting tip of the iceberg, or it could be a sunken duck, either or, depending on how the courts view it. If the courts view it as this is a copyright infringement, then AI could have some big problems. However, if the court goes, we're too ignorant, we've never done this before, we have no idea, we have no precedents, they may let it slide. So 2024 is going to be a big year from a legal perspective on, are writers really protected? Is movie people, is even just my voice, your voice, and Craig's voice protected? Or does that become free game as far as being pumped into AI as well?
Right, and I think that's sort of a topic that that it is relevant to this, because that's one of the things. If you look at when you upload a book to Amazon now, they're asking questions about whether or not any of your content was AI generated, and nobody really knows for sure why they're doing that. But we can speculate, right? One of the speculations I think that's most valid is the idea that if the courts do come down and say something isn't allowed or whatever, there's some restriction needs to be made, Amazon then has a flag that's already been set saying, here's all the books we have to worry about. We can either block them, ban them, apply the rules, whatever, right? I think that's the most likely reason why they're capturing that information.
Well, yeah, actually do remember, if you remember a few months ago, what happened was, I think it was James Patterson and another writer out here in America, said, someone called her and said, hey, great book, just read your latest. And she's like, what? I didn't write that. So somebody managed to upload into Amazon, assume her identity, create her own ISBN number, and release a book under this woman's name, but collect the royalties from it. And the writer, who his real name was like, wait a minute, that ain't me, man. It's on my bag, baby. That's on my book. So that's why Amazon is now doing the scan up to say, okay, where did this come from? Are you really who you say you are? And Craig, you brought up a great point. AI is really going to be, the crisis of AI is going to be the crisis of trust. Is this really coming from a source? Is this coming from a person that really is out there? Or is this an AI generated character? Face, makeup, all the things you're seeing now with AI, where we now can use generative AI to create images of models. Is it somebody that's not even a real person anymore? But I think Amazon's doing the right thing by scanning up first and looking inside going, okay, did you write this? Is this you? And then you also have to have a Library of Congress number, and you have to have some other stuff to prove yourself. But I do think that Amazon at least is attempting to try to address the trust issue for every content going into their site as well.
Yeah, and I think, when those rules do come down, we're going to see, potential changes. But and maybe you have an idea of what you think that the sort of decisions will come down as. Personally, I think that there's no way that they're going to ban it completely. There's just no way. It's just too ingrained. There's too many big companies using it. There's too much going on right now, right? So I don't have a big fear. Some people are like, oh, well, I don't want to use any kind of AI because if it becomes illegal all of a sudden, I don't think that's going to happen. I wouldn't make any sort of decisions with that fear as being it's just not valid in my opinion. No. What might happen, I think what is the most likely, so there's two things. One is that they might just say, we can't do anything. And the other might be, it becomes sort of like a royalty thing, like Spotify and all that, where it's the big companies that are providing these LLMs that have to pay people somehow, some amount. I have no idea how they'll ever figure that out, but or they'll give some kind of a flat fee payout or something, and they'll bear that cost, and it's not really going to come down to consumers, other than maybe to use it, the prices will go up or whatever. But I personally don't think, anything that's written in the past, I don't think there's going to be some blanket ban on them.
No, it's too well ingrained. But you do bring up a great point, Craig. What really has started to happen in America is that the legislation is starting to work on the ability to watermark your content. So anything within an LLM has to have a watermark back to the person that actually wrote the original piece. That's one way, and it works the same way in the music industry. When a song is played over and over again, there's people that were one-hit wonders that are still collecting royalties. So when someone plays the music from Quiet Riot from the 1980s, they're still getting money every month from that. That's because their song is watermarked. So if it's played anywhere and anywhere, or used in a movie or used on a commercial or something, there's a royalty there. I think AI content creators like ourselves that create content will be watermarked before it enters an LLM, and then we can get royalty based on the fact that how many times has our content been within these different models. I think that's where it's going to go. I think then we'll be able to collect a protection royalty. But I think the other big problem that we're probably going to face is disclosure. I mean, let's face it. I mean, big tech in America has not been great on, disclosing their censorship. They've not been great on saying how much information they've suppressed during the election cycles and things. So you're not exactly trusting the truster at this point, right? So there has to be something. But I do like what the European Union has done, to be honest. I mean, there's a lot of regulations that have come out specifically around having companies disclose what's in their AI before the product can be entered into the EU. So now companies just can't show up and say, here's our product. Oh, yeah, we have AI, but we're not going to tell you what we're doing. The European Union now requires companies to disclose what's in it, what's in the black box, where's your data from, where the LLM come from. And companies are very uncomfortable sharing that because that's their intellectual property. That's their competitive edge, right? So in cyber, I used to compete with companies that wrote a cyber AI product to stop hackers, but they wouldn't tell anybody how they did it. Now the European Union says, oh, if you want your product in our member states, tell us what's inside. And that's terrifying some companies right now. So I like the leadership of the EU when it comes to AI. I think US is dragging their feet because there's money in politics. But I do think that the way the European Union has started to set down some laws for AI, I think is very good.
Yeah, I think my issue with that, though, is that it's the same sort of thing that I was talking about before, where that's all well and good if you apply those rules to those big companies, but they're going to be at a huge disadvantage against the ones that are not following those rules. And it's sort of, it's a different situation. Like I don't know, maybe there is like a black market Spotify out there where people can stream music and nobody's paying royalties. But in general, though, that's probably just a matter of people downloading songs, but there's not even really a point to it anymore. I mean, it's become so cheap, right, and commoditized. But I don't think that's the way it is with AI, right? I mean, you can have all these big LLMs, but I went out and I bought, a high-end graphics card so that I could install all this stuff on my computer and sort of work on it on my own, and I still use ChatGPT a lot, right? It's still better than the ones that I've installed. But for graphics, DALL-E is, I can come up with generate graphics just as good as those, and then I'm not restricted by all the different things that that the commercial ones restrict you on. And I think that's going to be the issue, is the more restrictions we put in place, the more pressure there'll be on these sort of underground ones to come out. And this is sort of the thing that, as technology moves on, it'll just become easier and easier to run this on your own, that you're not even going to need these really big companies. And so I don't know if watermarking is really going to be the answer, because I just figured, like, if somebody wants to, all that means is that the ones that are doing it right will be so restricted on their content. They can only give you this watermark content, and it'll be expensive because they'll have to be paying those people out. But then you're going to have all these underground ones that'll be like, we're every content, everything we can scrape off the web is in here. Yes. And that's what people are going to use. And I really don't see it being possible to stop, especially with AI, right? Like watermarks. How long will it take for AI to just beat the watermarks? I'm sure.
Absolutely. I think it's going to be more of a stopgap, but I will share with you from a writer perspective. When I write a blog today, and this, I really encourage writers to do this. When I write a blog on behalf of a client and I'm ghostwriting for somebody, I always submit not only my plagiarism report, but I also submit my AI checker report to my clients. So when they get that report, they actually look at it and go, oh, so this is 100% original. Yes, because I'm writing as it goes to them. They're putting their name on it, and they need to make sure that I didn't plagiarize, or more importantly, I didn't use AI to write it. So as writers, one of the things that you can help keep yourself, I would say, marketable, is make sure that you not only submit your plagiarism report to your clients, but also submit the AI checker report. And when it comes back as 0/00%, you got to take a lot of pride in that. That means you are creating original content still. The good news is that in the world today, there's still companies, there's still organizations and individuals that absolutely want original content. Even though that the buzz is AI and it does it quickly, I mean, you're going to lose a percentage of clients in the world that want to go the lazy route. But I will tell you that there's a lot of other companies out there that tried that, came back and said, our brand is being affected by the quality of this stuff coming out. We want original content. So when you upload things like securityboulevard.com and things like that, you actually have to have original content. But I think as a writer, I would encourage our fellow writers that if you're writing for the people you're ghosting, no problem. Just submit that plagiarism report with your content and your clients will have confidence in your work.
How accurate are those AI checkers? I know that, I haven't looked at them in a while. I know that when they first were coming out, everybody was posting about how, they put in their completely original stuff and it would say that it was X amount percent AI written, and people were putting in excerpts from real books and it was saying, yeah, that was AI written or whatever. Like, I don't see how it could really be accurate. I'm not really clear on how it all works. Like, unless it's not like it's keeping a database of everything it produces and then it compares against that, right? So it has to be looking at different ways that the sentences are constructed or whatever. But it seems like that's a pretty easy thing to change. You just change a few words here and there, and then all of a sudden it's not AI written, right? I think it's more likely you're gonna get those false positives, and I think that that's another thing where, again, I feel like it would be pretty easy to tweak the AI engine to beat the checkers if they wanted to, right? Yep. So how do those work and how accurate are they?
Well, they're work in progress. Just like spell check and grammar is still a work in progress. I mean, there's a lot of companies out there that are doing spell check and grammar today that miss things, right? Especially the tools that are being written, in other parts of the world that are being modernized and put into, the English language. I think one of the things that's great about using those tools, though, is that it really gets the writer to find a positive way to use AI. I use several AI tools to do keyword searches. I use it to help me sort through petabytes of data. It also tells me what my SERP score is compared to other people's articles in Google. So these are valuable things that I need as a writer to know, well, is this article going to be in the top 3? Can you imagine not having AI to do that? There's no way that you can manually calculate what you think your SERP score is going to be on SEO without having AI. So AI is here, and I agree with your point earlier, Craig, as well, is that it's here. It's just going to be here. Now, as a writer, you have to find a way to adapt or move on, and you have to learn to play in the AI world in some form. I think using the plagiarism checkers is good. I think using the AI checker is good. I think using it to be able to determine your SERP score is very good. I think also, more importantly, I think it also shows that when someone says, well, how are you using AI? You can say, as a writer, I use it for research. I use it for headers. I use it for this. So you're finding ways to adapt into it. Where I think companies are missing the point is that they think it's going to replace everything. Like the 10 staff writers, we don't need them. Well, yeah, you do, because somebody still needs to proof it. Somebody still needs to read it as a human and go, hey, before we put this out on every magazine, is this really a good article, or is this going to get us in trouble? The thing you brought up, which I want to go back on AI a little bit, one thing AI has done poorly and will continue to do poorly is that it's not very social aware. Particularly, I know in Europe, there was a big thing in one of the European privacy policies was, we do not want AI to take an opinion on culture. We don't want to differentiate one culture from another. We don't want to feel like it's picking on one side of society and not another. And AI is never going to have a conscience. Never. So you have to have that writer that takes what AI spits out. In my case, it gives me a header, but I've got to write the content. I still have to write the verb. I still have to write the voice, right? Now, if you rely highly on AI and suddenly you offend somebody, then opinions really diving into it. This whole privacy thing is that we do not want AI to offend our culture. We don't want it to pick on one side of society over another. So I think that when companies have said, we don't need you, the reason they've come back is they said, we got into trouble by putting this out there. That's because somebody did not really read it and say, yeah, you did. I mean, you took an opinion that wasn't accurate to your company's culture. So I think writers have to find a way to adapt, to find AI to be part of their repertoire of tools. And that's what employers are looking for. When you interview as a writer today, that's one of the big things they ask. How do you use AI? Not do you use AI? It's how do you use AI? And I think the more that they get used to the various different tools like Phrase.io and SEMrush and some of the others that are out there, then you become more marketable and employable, right? But it's not replacing you. It just becomes an added capability to make your content better.
Yeah, and I mean, that's what I've always been sort of advocating as well, is that authors don't run in fear from this, is because that was the knee-jerk reaction that that was the knee-jerk reaction that happened originally when it first came out, right? And I was more concerned with the idea that we don't run away from it. We instead embrace it as a tool that we can use to make our jobs easier and better.
Agreed.
But I think, as you're pointing out, there are issues, and the whole social awareness thing. I mean, that is one of the biggest problems that they're sort of finding, is it's going to have that bias based on what it's been trained on, right?
Yes, correct. That's correct.
Yeah. So I mean, conservatives can build a conservative-based AI, and liberals or Democrats can build a Democrat, focused one, and if you're just using some random one, you don't really know what it was trained on and what its biases might be, and that's a little bit scary as well.
Yes, very much so. And you're right. And that's really where it goes back to that beautiful element you brought up at the beginning of the broadcast, was trust, right? How are you going to trust what's there? And people are already starting to do that today. Do I trust this email? Do I trust this voicemail? Am I trusting this person's opinion? And I think that's where, when you see people that are abandoning writers for AI and just slapping, an icon or a simple image of somebody on their article, that's not the article itself anymore. So I definitely advocate for writers to say, maybe you need to diversify, become more of a copywriter, more of a proofer. I even get hired today by people that create this massive document with a ChatGPT, and they come back saying, would you mind editing it? Would you mind making it look so non-AI? So it does cost people one way or another. I said, fine, it's a 30-page document that ChatGPT spit out, but now you have to pay somebody thousands of dollars to un-AI it and make it more human. So yeah, it's definitely a very interesting time to be a writer, but I think learning the way to evolve into an AI world makes you more marketable, and more importantly, more valuable as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm not really of the opinion that it's going to take over the writing of anything anytime soon. Maybe not ever, in the sense of creative writing. I can see using it for short blog articles that don't necessarily need to be to have a voice, or to be really creative or whatever. I don't think most places are going to use it to that level, but there are people that are sort of really just using it to make money by generating SEO articles and putting up a quick website that can generate ad revenue or whatever, right? But I think where it shines for me is in the brainstorming, in the coming up with ideas. And even if they aren't necessarily super creative ideas, to me, it's the idea that it's triggering things that I wouldn't have thought of, or that my brain wasn't going down that path. And by having it come up with ideas, that sort of helps push me around to different things, and then allows me to expand on. I once, one of the early things I did with ChatGPT was I created this like writer's room experience, where it's like, okay, you're 3 different people, and this person's named this, and they have this kind of a personality, and this person has this, and now let's brainstorm coming up with a TV pilot, and then I would say something, and they would respond in their different voices, and then and we went down a path, and by the end I came up with an idea that I thought was really good. I never would have come up with it on my own, never would have, but it just kept pushing me in ways, and I didn't always love their ideas, so I'd just be like, nah, let's not do that, or let's tweak that, or let's expand on that. What else could we do, right? And I think that's where it really shines. Would I then say write an episode of it? No, I mean, it's not gonna do that. But you can have it do that, and then you can use that as a starting point where you're gonna just completely rewrite the thing. Because for a lot of people, that blank page syndrome is a tough thing, right? You don't know where to start. I mean, listen, I've sometimes taken an article or a blog or even a podcast and fed in all the information into ChatGPT and said, give me an intro to this. And I never use the intro it gives me, but it always comes up with something that I can work with. And it helps me sort of get there faster than if I had just done it, from scratch on my own. So I think that in that sense, there's a lot of ways that AI can really, really help authors optimize.
Absolutely, I agree with that. That's actually how I started using AI recently to help with headers. So a client would give me a prompt and say, hey, here, I want you to write an article about, extended detection and response for cyber attacks and automation of cyber attacks. And I came back and pumped that into AI, and it came back and said, here's the recommended headers that this article should be. And I like the headers. And to your point, Greg, I would never have thought of these headers, to be honest. It was like, wow, okay, so that's pretty cool. So I would use some of the headers. Then I would start my creative writing. And it just came out to be a better piece. I mean, it touched on subjects about, cybersecurity that I didn't even think of. I do think that's a great way. Again, that became a tool for my writing as well. And it also made my product that I created for my clients much, much better. And I noticed my SEO scores got better. I noticed that the documents became more searchable. The topics were more relevant to the day, especially things that rapidly change as quickly as they do in cyber. Using the AI to help with headers really helped. I love your blank page, because when people have been writing fiction today, they're like, okay, where do I start? It was the day in the morning and sitting at a table in the sunset of Paris. Boring. Versus having AI help you with your first opening paragraph. So yeah, I think there's some value, but I look at it as a great tool that is going to help you as a writer make a better product, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are other ways too. Brainstorming is definitely the one I use it for the most. But some people are using, I've used it even to proofread, to just do regular proofread. I wouldn't use it as a developmental editor, but say, hey, what are your suggestions for grammar and spelling? And well, spelling you should be catching anyways with spell checks, but like grammar issues and punctuation, and it'll notice poorly phrased sentences. It often goes a little off the rails and tries to really rewrite the whole thing in a completely different voice, and sometimes you have to rein it in and be like, listen, I just said proofread. And you can't offend it. And sometimes I'm like, what are you not understanding about proofreading?
Oh no, when you finished.
No, I'm just saying, like, you can say to it, it's not a person, right? You can't offend it. So you can be like, listen, man, get back on track.
Yeah. I mean, I started off as a commercial copywriter and an advertising copywriter, and my strength was always coming up with titles and headlines. And, the graphic designer would say, hey, we've only got 8 characters. Can you fit this into that? And it would take me hours of brainstorming and drinking cups of coffee and stuff. And now you can put something into AI and say, can you generate 20 taglines? And maybe 15 of them will be junk, but there'll be 5 that maybe you tweak or something and they're good. And it's like, that does it like that. Because AI, you can't insult it, but also it doesn't get tired. It doesn't need cups of coffee. It can keep churning out stuff. It doesn't have existential crisis about why the hell is it doing this commercial copywriting instead of writing a novel in Paris. It's like it's a machine, and it's a tool.
It is, and a good one. And again, I've managed to not only continue to keep writing for people, but I've actually picked up more customers because of my content. So again, as a writer, I love where AI is going to do the right thing and do some good things. But at the same point, to your point, Roland, I am not brainstorming for an hour and a half in a coffee shop in downtown Los Angeles anymore. I can pump it in 10 minutes and get, here you go, and I'm off and running. And I find it to be more exciting writing, to have a third of, like, it's like having a writing coach with you. It's like someone giving you, hey, this is where you should be taking it. So think of AI as a good writing coach as well. And when you write by yourself, writers, we have a lot of solitude when we write. But AI has become, and by the way, this is also common in software development. Now with Microsoft Copilot that they picked up from GitHub, now Copilot's giving the developers some code suggestion. Hey, by the way, while you're writing, you may want to use this source code or use this line of coding. So I think the idea of having a Copilot for fictional writers and blog writers, I think is very, very open. I think writers should be open to that idea.
Yeah, I like that idea, and I've actually used even just ChatGPT even to like write. Just I was like very curious about whether it really can produce workable code. So I would be like, write give me a version of the snake game, that I can put in HTML that I could just put into my browser, and it did. And then you could tweak it. You'd be like, okay, change the color of this and show me scores, and every time this happens, make this happen, and it just rewrites the, like, it amazes me. Like, I think coders, because there's less creativity, probably have a lot more to worry about than writers do, with AI taking over their jobs.
Well, I think they're going to, so I know a lot of development people in the tech space, and it's not them, it's the people above them. It's the chief development officers that are under massive deadlines to produce digital transformation solutions faster, because the company's revenue, company's growth, their whole operations models, cutting costs, the pressure to develop faster applications and systems has never been more rapid than it is today. So when they're looking at someone saying, we're now going to move into a market, we don't have 6 months, we have 6 weeks. And we need this product and capabilities done. So it's not a question of if the developer likes it or doesn't like it. It's the chief development officer above him or her to say, okay, we need that feature in 3 days. So Copilot is going to be absolutely a necessity for developers. Same way that, what we use for AI for writers is going to be a necessity. We have to produce likable, addressable content within a shorter period of time that has to be marketable, addressable, and more importantly, searchable. So I'm encouraging writers, find a way to embrace AI. It's going to be here. It's a great tool if you know how to be able to put it together. But ultimately, your voice is what people want. So there's always going to be a great market.
Yeah, one of the things with software development that I'm most excited about as a gamer, I don't have as much time these days, but I still really enjoy gaming when I can. And, playing big sort of open world games, one of the issues is always sort of like the AI, and it isn't great, and either it's too hard, it's too easy, it doesn't adapt. You figure out the hole, you figure out the solution, and then you can beat it every time. Or but also the interactions with the characters are always a static interaction, right? So now and it hasn't really come out yet, but I'm hearing things about people working on it now, is the idea that you'd have these open world games where the characters would be driven by AI, so that your interactions with them would be different all the time, and they would adapt to whatever it is you're talking about within certain constraints, right? So, but my point there is that even with that, you still need your writers, because you still need that storyline, the overall storyline, the overall characters to be fleshed out. But then you sort of give that information to the AI. You might take a character and say to him, okay, this is your character. You tell the AI, this is this character, and he's this kind of person. So you can act like that. The NPC, the non-playing character, can act like that character, talk like them, and their answers could be in their style and this and that. And maybe you can even tell them, here are some things you can talk about, here are some things you can't talk about, et cetera, right? They'll have rules. But so somebody has to write all that. And a writer really has to write all that to make it fit. It's where the AI takes over and makes it really super cool, is that it's no longer these 3 canned responses that it can write. It's like you can say something completely off the wall and it'll respond to you.
Yes. Well, one thing also, and another point about AI, as people are going to discover, is that even though there's 100 million plus people using ChatGPT in the world, When you look at AI at an organizational level, from where people have taken AI and make it actually a production system, less than 5% of the organizations have actually done that. What's really stopping AI right now is the cost. To your point about gaming, I mean, I loved Madden NFL, all the time when I played it with EA, but I didn't like the fact that Joe Montana had the best AI. I wanted somebody else to be better, but that was a static thing, right? So now they're talking about generating where the players' scoring varies depending on how well they perform within the game, which has never been done before. The problem is the data center and the NVIDIA cards that they have to purchase is so expensive. So to get AI to be AI, there's the whole fictional thing of, hey, this is really cool. And the non-fictional thing, yeah, it really works. But what people are missing is the back end of this is incredibly expensive. I mean, the data center compute alone to generate AI to be usable is enough to scare most organizations, say, we're kind of in a wait and see. So 2024 is really supposed to, where organizations are finally going to look at saying, we know AI has a very poor return on investment, which had never been profitable. Number two, why are we doing it? Are we doing it for employee reduction? Are we doing it to better products? Are we doing it to do this? So this is going to be a very important year for AI, even for EA and some of the other gaming companies, to say, okay, what do we have to do this? Well, we need 100 million in data center compute. What? I mean, that would wipe out their earnings, basically. Or a medical company says, we're going to use AI to do diagnostics. Well, does that mean we can let go of 10 doctors? No. We still need the doctors. Well, okay, help me here. Why are we spending this money again? That's the CFO issue today. It's the cost. And I think what's really important is that even while they're still trying to figure out the cost, they still need writers. They still need software people. They still need editors. They still need illustrators. They still need the human person to go, while y'all figure that money stuff out, you still need to produce a newsletter every day. Still got a blog.
And I think that those costs will come down over time. I mean, I see it all the time, and what we can do now as opposed to what we could have done even a month ago, especially in the homegrown space, where it's one thing to be like, okay, well, it takes forever for OpenAI to come out with a new version, or Facebook or whatever. But if you're involved in the sort of like the homegrown space of people that are producing this stuff and coming up with it on their own time, there's just so many of them out there, and almost daily you're seeing big changes coming on that end. And they're taking these big language models that are huge that you couldn't run on your computer, and they're somehow reducing them in size so that they're maybe not as good, but they're almost as good, but they're a fraction of the size that you can run it on your own computer. So I think that all that sort of stuff is going to get there in time. But where do you think that this is going to go in the future? I mean, you're sort of a futurist, right? You're writing this kind of stuff. You're ingrained in it. Where do you think, what do you think is going to be sort of the next big change for AI as it pertains to writers and how we do our work?
Well, let's talk about, one of the obvious things, which is autonomous cars. So autonomous cars was supposed to come out by now, where you can sit in your car and the car will drive for you. You suddenly have a cardiac arrest in the car. The car detects that. The car looks up and says, okay, the nearest hospital is here. Let me call the hospital, and they'll be waiting for us with your medication and a gurney to wheel you into an emergency room that will immediately plug you in and determine that you've had a heart attack, panic attack, or a potential full cardiac arrest. That's where we are supposed to have been today. Now, what ruined all of that was, number one, cybersecurity. Hackers hacking cars, hacking medical devices, hacking 5G networks. So that put a major slowdown. The second thing is, who's paying for all this? Who's paying for the new cameras that have to go on all the light posts? Who's paying for all this? So where I really think what's really going to hinder AI is not only going to be the cost of AI, but I do think it's the cyber protection of it. It's the trust. It's, do I really trust what's coming out of that? And these are all not roadblocks. These are all real world problems that companies that are producing content, or more importantly, even systems that rely on AI. Autonomous cars is a great example. The robots that they have running around the shopping malls to protect retailers ran over a kid in San Jose a few months ago, right? Was that an AI problem, or was that something that was just too mechanical? So there's still so many problems that are coming from it. And again, it goes back to that laziness factor, right? We want to use this because we don't have to hire a security guard. Well, security guard going to cost you $10 an hour, $15 an hour, and you're replacing it with a $500,000 robot. So I think people are sort of getting into this. We've got to be AI to be competitive. True. But if you become over AI and you're not ready to absorb the AI, you could be financially wiped out. So I think 2024, as I mentioned, is going to be a real interesting year to find organizations that have found a way to make AI better. They found it to be productive, but more importantly, they found it to be cost effective. If they can't solve cybersecurity problems, cost problems, operational problems, and so on, AI could be the most expensive toy on the shelf. And that could, and it end up, to be honest with you, I mean, give companies 3 years life cycles. It may even force the company to go bankrupt because they went too AI'd and it didn't pay off. So I think this is going to be a 2024 as people are going to really come to that reality of we are going to have AI in our world. This is what we're going to live with. High cost. Hopefully it does this. We think it's going to do this, but that's really where transformation comes from. So I think 24 is going to be an AI transformation year.
Wow. Well, we are coming up to the end of the hour, but that is a kind of a bombshell revelation to wrap things up with. So I find that fascinating. Maybe we'll have you back next year to see whether your predictions came true.
I'd love to come back. You guys have a wonderful podcast, and I really appreciate you having me on.
So Craig, before we ask Patrick to tell us where we can find out more about him, do you have any final questions or thoughts?
I don't think I have any more final questions. I think, we really did just touch the tip of the iceberg here. And I don't know if we'll even need to wait till next year to have Patrick back on and talk about this some more. I'm sure that there are some topics we're going to want to dive even deeper into in the future, and especially as things sort of continue to at the breakneck pace of innovation in this space, right? So yeah, thanks for coming on and sort of talking us through all this. I think the key here is that, what we've sort of always been saying is AI is not something to be feared. No. It's something to be used as a tool, but don't overuse it. Don't try to use it for things that it really isn't going to be used what it's going to do a good job on, right? Yeah. You have to understand the limitations and the costs and everything, and then figure out where that fits in your life and your workflow to make everything easier and cheaper and better for you.
Agree, very much so, and I really agree with you. And I think, as I mentioned, let's look at 2024 as an AI transformation year, and we'll see in a year or even less. We'll see by the summer. The Paris Olympics is coming up. How much is NBC going to be using AI to be able to predict how the athletes do, or predict the crowds, or predict the security potential risk to Paris? So AI is everywhere. It's just, as writers, we have to embrace it as a wonderful tool. Just use it cautiously as well.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much. Now, Patrick, where can people find out more about you? Where can they go?
So first of all, psychowriterllc.com has all my books. I have both Sunrise and Saigon, which was released in 2022. The sequel to that, Shores of Okinawa, is coming out Memorial Day 2024. These are cybersecurity with a little bit of international mystery and a little bit of romance as well. But psychowriterllc.com, they can be able to find everything about my book and also my podcast as well.
That's wonderful. Well, we'll of course pop a link down below. And if you want to go and check that out while you're down there, why not leave Patrick a comment and let him know how much you appreciated what he shared with us today, or put your own predictions for how AI is going to impact 2024. Yes. And also, there's a subscribe button, there's a little bell notification, and we will be back next week with another episode of Fully Booked. So until then, cheerio.